Hi, folks. Steven here. So, I am here with Anne from Pikapi Podcast. And as I guess per usual, we are doing another Pokemon side game music discussion tonight. I don't have a full-on pre-show, kind of unfortunately for folks.
No AI tests for me today?
Unfortunately, I didn't have time to really put all that stuff together with some other stuff I'm working on. But in the meantime, Anne, why don't you go do a quick introduction for yourself?
Hi, my name is Anne. I run Pikapi Podcast, which I've not uploaded a new episode in about a couple weeks now because I've also running a booth at a farmer's market this summer, which also is very Pokemon related, but my life has gotten very full very suddenly. So I have many new Pokemon prints to add to my Patreon and many new Pokemon episodes that I need to sit down and record. But when I return to it, it is a Pokemon podcast recapping the entire anime series from start to finish. And currently I am in Advanced Generation, trekking through the Hoenn League and getting kind of close to movie number 7. So it's a fun
See
time.
how all that fills in there. Let's see, what else? On my end, let's see, I did put out a short about a week and a half ago, I guess at this point, talking about a cassette tape I picked up off of eBay of the single of The Power of One from the second Pokemon movie. I kind of want to correct one little thing there. I said that there was one song on side A and one on side B, and no, it's the same 2 songs on each side. I explained why it took me a little longer to rewind it than I thought it would. But that was kind of interesting. I did see the sticker was on there in the eBay listing for the fitness club or whatever, but it just didn't process thoroughly through me. And so once I opened it, I was a little bit surprised, in part because it had been a little while since I had ordered it. I don't know, Anne, if you have any thoughts on that particular one. But
Fun surprise. So, was the other side like the karaoke tracks or anything, or was it really
nope,
just
same thing on both sides. Both songs, both sides.
I've never seen that. Interesting.
Yeah, it uses more tape that way, obviously, but otherwise you'd have to worry about which of the songs is longer, and so on and so forth.
Well, that's true.
So that's kind of interesting. So I think there was anything else I wanted to toss in here. But yeah, so we did do a live stream earlier this week as well. If you want to see us fumble playing Pokken Tournament DX on Switch.
Yeah, neither of us are real proficient, but we had a great time.
Yeah, over the time when there was competitive organized play, I did get to interview a few folks about the game, and I'd certainly respect, their skill and talent and whatnot. Excuse me. So, whatever we say about the gameplay in our gameplay discussion, but otherwise, I think we can go ahead and I think we can get started. Anne, are you ready to start recording here?
I am so ready.
Okay, let me go ahead and start my recorders. There we go. All right, punch up my notes.
In the chat with us yet?
Yes, if anyone does have comments on the game or its music, please do share those, and we will try to work those into our discussion. If you're watching this on replay, of course, you can do the same, and we'll try to work that into a future discussion. All right, so oops. Get those notes back up. There we go. All right, so leave a little bit of a pause, and then I will go from there. Hi, folks. Steven here. I'm on the phone with Anne from Pikapi Podcast. And in our continuing series of Pokemon side game music discussions, we've reached Pokken Tournament. We've reached Pokken Tournament, an arcade / Wii U / Switch game, depending on which version you play out there. To give a little perspective on the release dates for each version, see, the arcade came out in July of 2015. The Wii U version came out in March of 2016. And then the Switch version, the DX version with some extra content from an updated version of the arcade game, came out in September of 2017. So, I don't know if you could quite call the DX version. It's not really a remake because it's more of an expanded special edition type deal. But as far as how this game was announced, it kind of got a weird tease because I think must have been early 2015 or very late 2014, they put out a video, an unrelated video from the Pokemon Company on their channel, or something of that nature. And I remember at the video there were two Pokemon sort of facing off in an arena of some sort. They weren't really fighting at that point. They were just kind of waving their hands around in sort of an idle pose. And that was actually our first glimpse of Pokken Tournament. People really speculated on what that was at the time. And do you know the video I'm talking about?
I don't. I don't really have a strong memory of it, sorry.
It was quite some time ago, so I'll forgive you for that for sure. But and then at some point later, probably within a month or two, they announced the game. And like I said, it came out to Japanese arcades in 2015. Now, I did get a chance to play the arcade version a couple times. Once was at Worlds 2015 in Boston. They had a few units, I forget exactly how many, set up there, and I actually got to go in and play around against someone. I did lose, by the way. You can see that video on my YouTube channel if you dig through there. I did play the Japanese arcade game actually earlier this year, a couple months ago, when it was I found a unit at the Midwest Gaming Classic in Milwaukee back in, I believe, April. So that's my other experience with it. I did purchase the Wii U version, but never really got into it. And the Switch version, well, obviously we did a live stream earlier, a few days before we recorded this, and that one I picked up from one of the local library branches here in Madison. So your tax dollars at work, folks. Were able to get me a copy of that. Anne, I don't know what your trajectory was. I'm sure it was a little different than mine. Why don't you go ahead and let us know?
I mean, similar in some ways. I, never bought a copy of this when it first came out, but I picked it up at various conventions and things that had a game room and gave it a try here and there. But I never really sat down and gave it a lot of time until very recently when I managed to get a used copy and we played for our stream. So, and now I actually really like it.
Well, that'll come into play in our game discussion, I suppose. Let's see. Oh, I did try to look for like a used copy I could buy. I mean, I could technically have bought it full price digital off the Switch eShop, but not that I totally disliked this game or resented it or anything, but somehow I just didn't feel like I was going to get my full value out that way. So I did check one of the local used game stores, and they said they maybe got one copy that came through, at least of the Switch version. So we'll be talking about why this game, it wasn't a failure by any means, but it may not have been the success they were looking for. But yeah, that's sort of the history there. This game was produced by Bandai Namco, which, given that this is a loose derivative, I guess, of the Tekken series, is not entirely surprising. I believe Namco is the side that Tekken comes from of all of that. Of course, Bandai Namco also works on another fighting game series these days. They've worked on the last couple Super Smash Bros. Games, 3DS and Wii U, and then Ultimate. They've been involved on both of those, so certainly have a lot of experience there. As far as the musicians who worked in this, there were actually quite a few, probably more than we'll be able to go into super deep detail. The sort of lead person seems to be Hiroki Hashimoto, who, as have a lot of the folks on this list, worked on Smash Ultimate, and Demon X Machina, or that I've seen that phrase before. I do not know the correct pronunciation of it. And were you able to dig up anything on this person who's apparently the lead music person?
I mean, the closest thing I can think is it looks like they are kind of the Nintendo connection and kind of taking lead on the project, while all the other composers look like they specifically have worked on Tekken and other games under that company. So I think, yeah, that's the most I can find is their connection is to Nintendo, to the Pokemon Company, to Smash and kind of the circle of people that we've seen already, and then most of the other music composers seems to be the new the other company coming in under his leadership.
Yeah, Bandai Namco has obviously a fair number of folks. One I wanted to point out was Hiroyuki Kawada, who I guess this might have been actually the last Namco game they worked on. I think they either retired or moved on to other things after this. They've been there since the 80s. I think it's actually a he. But in any case, one of the games I found under that name was the Famicom Star Wars game. Now, this isn't the JVC-produced Star Wars NES game. This is the kind of somewhat infamous Famicom one that is, in terms of gameplay, kind of its own thing, and has that bizarre scene where you fight Darth Vader and he turns into a scorpion. It's that one. Now I kind of wish I had picked up a copy of that when I was in Japan. But worked on many Bandai Namco games over the years, including Time Crisis and, of course, Tekken. And did you have anything on that specific person?
Well, just that you said it doesn't look like he retired when he left Bandai. He left the company in 2015, but it looks like he continued to work sporadically. I'm not sure if he was just freelancing or what, but he kind of got into a lot of like music arranging, voiceover production, and like has been working as late as 2021, or at least has a credit on one that late. Like he may have retired a few years before that project released, but yeah, so whatever he's doing, he's staying busy.
I suppose so. One other familiar name on here, Shota Kageyama, the off and on Game Freak person who I think started working, with Generation 2 or 3 there, but worked on the main series games and shows up every now and again on these lists. Worked a little bit on the score to the Secrets of the Jungle movie. So definitely a more well-known link there. Fair number of other names. Everything from House of the Dead on some of their credits, Ace Combat, Soul Calibur, let's see, Idolmaster, which is a phrase, I've heard that name out there. I couldn't tell you anything about the franchise, really.
It's a music game.
As you'd expect, kind of there, but yeah.
Yeah, you're trying to control an idol group and get them to rise to stardom.
It's kind of a business simulator / music game or something like that, or
I've never actually played it, but yes, that is what I'm told.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of those soundtracks listed in like the video game music database, so definitely recognize the name. But beyond that, Anne, any other names on this list you wanted to make sure got a shout out?
I mean, there's a couple names, and this has happened before with other people too, that are also names of people who are famous musicians, like, and even pop stars in Japan. So like it's going to be hard to dig up anything on some of these composers because some of them share names with people who are very famous, and so their internet records get a little mudged sometimes, and some of them may actually be the same person. It's hard to tell. So that's kind of exciting and worth a deep dive for someone who has a lot more time on their hands than either you or me.
Yeah, definitely got some interesting results on...
Right.
Excuse me. Definitely got some interesting results doing some searches for this. As far as the overall style, well, I do think there's a lot of influence maybe from actually a lot of other Pokemon games, and I get the feeling that they definitely listen to music from a lot of other Pokemon side games that we may bring up here and there with various aspects of this. I'd say the soundtrack is kind of like half electronic and half traditional instruments. Like, it's kind of the best way I can describe it. Yes, there are a number of tracks that have both, but in terms of the sound it's going for, there's some of each. And does that seem kind of fair?
Yeah, because they definitely have credited, like, there's a flautist, there's a violinist, there's a guitar, and like a lot of analog, for lack of a better word, instruments. But then there's also a lot of synths as well. So it's kind of an interesting blend. And we can talk on certain specific tracks of how that comes together in really interesting ways.
Yeah, so as per usual, we've each picked out 3 tracks. Let's see, I picked out, I'm not sure exactly on the pronunciation of all of these, of course, and of course these track names might differ depending on where you look them up. I'm not aware of an official soundtrack for this game, as most Pokemon style games don't get one. But in any case, we have Teller Town, Autumn. There's a couple of stages that have variations. This is the Teller Town Autumn track. Let's see. Draw, as opposed to win or lose. And Event Anne. I did kind of point out to Anne, this is what you get for not picking your songs first, is that I got to pick the one that has one of our names in it. In any case, Anne, which 3 did you pick?
I picked the Magic Harp Festival, the Reggie Ruins, and the Haunted House.
Yeah, obviously a variety of stages here, even though they all, at least theoretically take place in the same, general fictional area. But we're going to start with one of Anne's picks. This is the Reggie Ruins. And Anne, what sort of caught your attention with this one?
Well, I am a sucker for an ethnobop, so this track opens with like this very Middle Eastern, East Asian, or South Asian style rhythm with like the da-da-da-da-da-da, and then it's got vocal chanting as well, and like this choral element that's really very amazing, and just kind of adds some gravitas to the whole thing. So you do feel the sense of atmosphere and location. You feel like you're in the desert and you've uncovered like the secrets of the Nile or something. And then there's this soft middle part where the violin is just going wild. So there's a lot of really interesting sounds going on in this, and some of them must have been synthesized, but I really, as a Newfoundlander, appreciate a fiddle going hard. So yeah, it's just a very, very cool little track.
Yeah, definitely a couple fiddle pieces, I guess you could say, in the soundtrack of this game.
Yeah, violinist is in my notes.
Yeah, most of that was what I sorry. Most of the things you mentioned were all things I picked out as well, and it makes sense given the sort of, mysterious ruins quality, obviously, given the name there. I don't have too much else to say, though. Anne, anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, the choir was an interesting choice just because it makes you, usually with a ruins, there's a sense of like isolation. But the choir kind of makes me feel like we're not alone here. I don't know. It's just an interesting choice that just adds a different dynamic to, I don't know, maybe what would be the expected way to go with that track, I guess.
All right, well, let's move on to one of my tracks. This is, like I said, the pronunciation on these, I'm not sure. Teller Town Autumn. Again, this is a couple tracks that have, one has a day-night swap, a couple others I think have seasonal variants. So this one I picked, I tried to, sorry, let me say it again. So there were a fair number of things I noticed with this one, strings, horns, woodwinds, acoustic guitar, and accordion. But I don't know, it was just, I never actually saw like any of those Irish string-based dance shows, like River Dance or Lord of the Dance or whatever back in the 90s. But I think those are kind of ingrained there. And there's a great fiddle section in this one. I think it's like given its own little bit for a while there. And that was the part of this track that I really enjoyed. And I assume you noticed that. What are your kind of thoughts?
Oh, yeah, no, I am all here for that fiddle. It's kind of an interesting track because it opens up. It feels like there's an air to those opening chords that feels like something I would have heard at Kohaku Utagassen, like the year-end music show in Japan, where they kind of have a song competition. And like this would be the track when I hear these chords, I'm like, ugh, the 80s style enka is coming. But then it kind of moves into this like ethno-European sort of thing with the fiddle and the notes going up and down really fast, and something that again just codes as, if not directly Irish, very Europe. Depending on what instrument basically you're using, the fiddle feels very Irish to me. So it's like an interesting use of instruments and musical sensibilities that create like a very unique mood that does feel very autumny. Like it does feel like the summer has ended and the winds of change are blowing the leaves in.
Yeah, something of that nature. Compared to one reason I picked this over the regular version of this is I just felt it was more interesting in a lot of ways. I think there are some obvious similarities between the tracks since they are effectively the same stage, but I think they just added more and transformed more in this one. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Anne, let's go on to your second pick. This is the Magikarp Festival. This one, I mean, it goes for a pretty obvious Oriental type feel with a lot of drums and stuff. What did you find interesting about it?
Well, like you chose the one with our name in it. I was always going to choose the one with the Magikarp in it. But yeah, I chose it because we're going to the Oban Festival. Like that is what this track is. It is a very Japanese track where we are just like beating our taiko drums and playing our flutes and celebrating our matsuri. And then it's just this intense drumming and traditional Japanese sounds. And then there's a breakdown and we rave. And I love this track. The second half, the drum pattern changes, and I kind of enjoy that shift in mood as well. But it's a very nice blend of old and modern that nonetheless feels still very Japanese and very much in line with what a festival is in that country. And obviously my floppy fish breaking down. I love it.
Yeah, perhaps if you don't have that great an opinion of Magikarp, this song sounds a little too energetic and deep, not necessarily deep compositionally, not that it's bad or anything, but like in terms of like low and stuff like that. Like, are you sure this isn't a Gyarados song? But I didn't dislike this song or anything. I think you're probably noticing a pattern from some of the folks at home that Anne got more out of the soundtrack than I did. I didn't think this was bad music by any means, but we'll talk more a little bit later.
Different tastes. That's all it is. I love a good Oban festival. Like I love a good matsuri and a street dance.
Yeah, stylistically, I do like this track. But let's move on to my second pick, which is Draw. And again, as I said before, that is as opposed to Win or Lose, which also have themes in here. Basically, after a battle finishes, there will be a little fanfare, and then usually I'm not sure how to describe that second part of it. It's that's the second. Yeah, it kind of does feel like a sports recap type of deal that you see in a lot of sports games where it shows all of the times and stuff. But the first part of each of those tracks is different. I wanted to kind of point out the draw. It is possible to get a draw in this game, either from a dual knockout or presumably since the matches are timed, you can end the round with the same amount of health left. And I assume that also counts as a draw. But in any case, I mean, I think the little stinger at the front, or whatever you want to call it, does do a good job of sounding in between the win fanfare, which is obviously very positive, and the lose fanfare, which is, it could be a lot darker and go in a different place, but it is definitely more negative. And then this one sort of splits the difference. So it's kind of interesting that they put in as much effort. This isn't the first Pokemon game with a draw mechanic. I think like the trading card game for Game Boy has a draw scenario, although that mostly just plays as a loss anyway. Yeah. So, Anna, any thoughts? You can certainly comment on the other two as well if you'd like to.
Well, I was just I was surprised and waiting to do this episode just to like hear why you chose Draw, because it's really super rad for the first 3 seconds, as you say, that stinger at the beginning with the guitars and everything, and then it's just kind of, as I said, the waiting music. It's just waiting. So I'm interesting to hear what spoke to you about this song. Because, like, I'm not going to lie, those 3 seconds at the beginning are really cool, but...
Yeah, I mostly found it interesting that they went so far. In fact, I know this is mostly, we're doing our game discussion later, but apparently some Pokemon have specific draw poses and like behaviors and stuff like that. So in the very rare event that you get a tie, they did put a little bit of effort. I mean, there's a couple ways to do this here and so on and so forth when you have a post victory. In Smash Brothers, of course, they do the usually the main theme or some other thing from the main franchise, and they say this game's winner is, and then you have Street Fighter where they have a and various other things depending on the game there. So in this particular case, like I said, each player gets their own fanfare based on what actually happened there.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So let's go on and to your next pick. This is the Haunted House theme. As you might expect, a lot of chilling organ in this one, and I'm sure you have some other things to say about it. Go ahead.
Oh, this is so dramatic. I love this track. It's kind of got, as you said, the organ is just going for the win here. It's big and bombastic, very like, this is Halloween. There are both effects and like electric guitars going ham and a synthesizer piano in the second half. So like they're just using everything they have to make the spookiest Halloween haunted house type music that you'd expect. And it ends up sounding just very well produced to my ears.
Yeah, they definitely knew what they were doing, and I think there's actually a couple other tracks related to this. Like I think there was some sort of Halloween event at some point that has a track in there. So I would say definitely one of the more interesting tracks in the game, compositionally and atmospheric and so on and so forth. So they definitely knew what they were going for with that. Any other things you wanted to call out for this one?
Not really. Except I love this stage, this design, and the visual design, the sound design. Like this is the best one in the game, I think. Besides the Magic Heart Festival, which has my heart.
Yeah. So the stage design we'll talk more about in our game discussion. So I have a few things to say there as well. But let's move on to my third, and this will be the final pick of ours. This is the event and track. So, Anne, I don't want to give away too much. This game, especially the console versions, does have something of a story there. And there's a female kind of shadowy figure that hangs around with Shadow Mewtwo called Anne. And she has her own has her own theme. And it's this sort of, honestly, kind of, it stands out from a lot of the other stuff. It's a moody piano melody. And that really, drew my attention when it came up there in the soundtrack. I don't think I actually got to the part of the game where this plays, unfortunately. But Anne, what were some of your reactions to this one?
Well, I was kind of surprised because it had elements that felt very Japanese city pop to me, but like how Pokemon would do a city pop track, if that made sense. It's like city pop, but slightly more childish and fun. Like, not that city pop isn't fun, it's just, but like that atmosphere. But yeah, as you say, very soothing, very jazzy, lot of delightful synth piano keys. But yeah, like atmospheric, moody, emotional.
Yeah, and I put down contemplative, or contemplative. Yeah, I think that's right. In any case, I put that down because I felt like there was a bit of thinking to it, which I guess, given that this character is associated with Shadow Mewtwo, there's a bit of a mysterious, variant that was created for the Pokken Tournament game. Gives it an interesting quality. Like I said, I haven't made it far enough. I may have to look up the story since this game is due back at the library in a couple days. But definitely interesting. All right, well, before we give our overall opinions, there's voice acting in this game, as you might expect. First off, all the Pokemon voices in this game are Japanese. That means, effectively, that a lot of them are maybe there's an exception somewhere, but I didn't run into one really. But that basically means that unless the voice carries over to the English one, so obviously like Pikachu, and I think Emolga, it might also be that, and a few others here and there, you're hearing the Japanese voices, which, a lot of Westerners are not very familiar with for various reasons. And I don't know. Well, we'll speculate a little bit on what might have happened with localization of this game in a moment, but I don't know. It didn't make it. I think it made it connect with me less, to be honest. There, not have the English voices, which most of, if not all, these Pokemon should have something out there for that. But yeah, so I'm not sure exactly what the deal is with that. I'm not angry about it so much as it just seems odd. I don't know. Anne, thoughts on this aspect?
I mean, it's definitely odd. I don't know. I mean, without talking to someone who worked on the development team, we won't know the reasons why, or like if there was like a technical issue that would prevent them from recording new voices, or if it was just too much effort. I don't know. It didn't bother me because, unlike you, I do watch the show in Japanese a lot. So like, to me, it's kind of like, oh, whatever. But like, I've heard this before. But I can definitely see that, for that, how it might kind of be a little jarring or disconnecting to hear something that does not sound like that Pokemon usually sounds when the announcer is speaking English. But it didn't bother me too much. But like, it's kind of just one of those things that's very curious. Like that's a choice you made, and I would like to know what was behind it. But again, until you get that interview, Stephen, we will never know.
Yeah, so not exactly sure what happened there, but sort of playing into some of the voice acting stuff. Yeah, there are plenty of human characters, and they do have English voice acting. Most notably, of course, there is Nia, who is your coach, guide. I forget exactly the name the game gives her for her role there. One interesting thing I found is apparently the English voice actor for her, Ananda Jacobs, I think it is. Hopefully that's not misspelled from Amanda. I think it is Ananda Jacobs. But in any case, she's a musician by trade, but apparently this is like was her first voice acting role there. So I'm not sure if this was something that maybe originally they had no intention of bringing to the West. And then when they realized, we're going to bring this to the Wii U, and whatever, that they had to put them together. That might also explain why the Pokemon don't have, English voices. But obviously they did have to get a number. Right. It's not just Nia. There's several other characters that have voice lines. Some of the other people, I don't know if you would call them trainers. I think there's a special name for them because the battling is different than in a regular Pokemon game here. But in any case, I don't know. I mean, I thought Nia, I don't want to be too hard on her since apparently this was her first real voice acting role. But she sounded like her inflections didn't really seem to always make a lot of sense. I don't know. And I didn't get really a chance to listen to the Japanese voice actress either. Anything to throw out there for this one?
I didn't get to hear the Japanese voice acting either. Like, I could find, for some reason, a lot of video games suffer from this where, like, the inflection is just weird. And I'm not sure if that's a dubbing issue or a direction issue or what. I didn't mind Nina's voice so much, though, as much as I just minded her talking to me while I'm trying to battle. She was useless. Shut up, Nia.
She was okay for the tutorial and stuff, but yeah, it's like I really wanted to turn her further down there than it would let me. So like I'm not saying, if you're still out there, if you're still in the industry and whatnot, nothing personal or anything. I think you may have just been dealt a rough hand of cards, to be honest.
Yeah, she has a nice tone to her voice, so it's one of those things, like, I would love to ask a lot of people a lot of questions, because I've seen this on a lot of video games where just, that does not sound natural at all. Most of us are capable of talking like a human, so it may have been a directorial thing or like a weird dubbing thing, but it's like, even when you don't have to match lip flaps, a lot of video games don't sound like a human would talk, and it's like, why? So I have questions, but I'm going to hold off my judgment of her until I have those questions answered, which maybe never. So
Yeah, so like I said, nothing personal in there, just kind of a weird idea. And who knows, maybe some time constraints as well. We kind of speculate on that as well here. All right, well, overall, I mean, we can kind of tell I didn't dislike the music in this game. I did like it, but Anne really liked the music in this game, it sounds like. My opinion is sort of, there are some definite decent tracks in here, but nothing, not too much totally blew me away or anything. So I don't know that I had too much to say in that regard. I think by the time this came to the Wii U, oh yeah, that's right, Live 365 had gone into bankruptcy and hadn't yet emerged under new ownership, so I never took anything from here to put it on the station. But Anne, so folks are wondering about that. But Anne, you certainly seem to have had a real treat or a real good time with the soundtrack here. Am I judging that correctly?
I did. I enjoyed a lot of tracks. All three of the ones I picked, I thought were great. There were a lot more that I was really interested in, and I felt like overall they had just an interesting vision and an interesting blend of their instruments and the types of instruments they chose to play live and the types of synths they used. Like, I don't know, like there's just an overall composition here that feels very fresh for some of the Pokemon games we've done before, and I really had a good time.
Yeah, and the other thing I kind of want to mention is that depending on how and where you played this, I'm not 100% sure on all this, but it sure seems like it's true. There seems like there might be some mixing differences or some volume differences. Like the thing I looked up on YouTube that has all this claims it's from the arcade version, and the arcades obviously have different sound design. I don't know if quirks is the right word there, sound design characteristics than a home console. And then on the Switch, like I was playing actually a little bit earlier today, and I was playing it like I had the headphones turned up all the way, and I still could like I don't know if they intentionally made it quieter there or something. And then earlier this week when we were playing live, I think the volume was much better, although obviously I had more control since that was in docked mode. So I'm wondering if there are some differences in EQ and volume and stuff like that, depending on where and how you played this. I don't know. And I suppose you probably didn't have enough time or whatever to experiment with all that, but any ideas?
No, but I mean, that's the common thing with music is to like check your mix for every possible type of headphone speaker it could play on before you release it. And if you're planning to release it on multiple devices, including an arcade game, which is going to have a very different set of acoustic needs, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they mixed it differently for every single release. Like that would make sense to me.
Yeah, one of the reasons this occurred to me, of course, is earlier this year, still no sign of a Western digital release, but they did in Japan put out the soundtracks to Sword and Shield, Legends Arceus, and Scarlet and Violet on CD there for Pokemon Day. And people noticed quite quickly that the EQ and some of the mixing stuff was quite different here. And it just kind of occurred to me that maybe I think there's some of these songs where I wasn't entirely sure what like I kind of knew what the lead instrument, but didn't feel like it was in the right place in the mix sometimes. And I wonder if that was sort of an artifact of having the different profiles, or I don't know. Just something I really noticed and wanted to make sure we called out here because, yeah, like arcade and home versions of games often do have different sound characteristics for partially that reason. All right. Well, like I said, I don't dislike this music. I think it's actually pretty decent and good and stuff. Just not as wowed by it as Anne apparently was. But if you had an opinion above, below, or somewhere in between ours, you can always give us a comment. You can drop a comment on one of these videos. You can drop us an email, pokepress@gmail.com, or you can go to @pokepress on Twitter and tell us there. But speaking of which, I do have a little bit of feedback. They're all pretty short, so I don't know that we'll spend a ton of time on them. I sort of condensed them into some slides here. Or actually I kind of condensed them into a single slide. All right, so here are a couple comments I have from various videos that I've gotten over the last month and a half. So one of these is another comment on the D. Train Williams interview, talking about someone, Cliff Fields, which I think there's 3 F's in there if you're looking for it. His albums are unreal. Talks about how he thinks he's a time traveler because he thinks they're crisp and sharp. And that's probably actually just because they were recorded digitally, which digital recording goes back to like the 70s, even before CDs became a thing. So that may be one of the reasons those sound so crisp compared to what you might have heard on the radio or something like that, or off a vinyl record. Let's see. Next one is my interview with Patrick Seitz from Anime Milwaukee earlier this year. Such a great guy from, Elite TISS 91. Patrick has quite a career doing a lot of different stuff there. One of my favorites of his is actually Ulbrich the Warrior in Octopath Traveler, the original one. I actually told him you sounded kind of somewhere between Worf and Sam Eagle from the Muppets, and I think that was about the right balance, which was kind of fun. And then this last one is a short on Pokemon Conquest, where I pointed out that, the music from that game, it's very consistent. And Guard Mystic pointed out, I think that's about how it's spelled, oh shoot, I wasn't the only one who thought the music was very consistent in this game. So, and I do have some thoughts on that third one, but any thoughts on the other two before we move forward with this?
I'm just glad to see everybody's appreciating these people for their great work.
Yeah, so as we kind of mentioned with the Magikarp Festival, there is some definite traditional-ish sounding Japanese stuff in this game. There's another one that's basically in a fighting dojo and has kind of a similar style. Pokken definitely is not as consistent either in tempo or tone as Pokemon Conquest was. But I don't know. Let's see, where exactly do I want to go with that? Sorry, folks. But I'm not sure that that can be a positive or a negative. With Pokemon Conquest, I listed it not as a negative to the soundtrack overall, but more as the experience of listening through the whole thing, that without sort of the pauses in between. I think, it was a little easier for me, for the most part, to get through the Pokken soundtrack. And it doesn't really have so much to do with the quality as, like I said, the consistency of the tracks. I don't know, Anne, any compare contrast you want to do there?
Well, the music of Conquest is not as fresh in my mind right now, and it's been a bit since we did that discussion, so I don't know what to say. It probably was very consistent and repetitive and lack of variety in some places, but I seem to remember us talking and digging up a lot of very different tracks that had a lot of different instrumentations and musical styles. And you say the Magikarp Festival sounded like the dojo, which I don't remember what the dojo especially sounds like, but that already sounds wrong to me because there may have been taiko drums, but taiko drums alone do not a matsuri make. I bet those were very different sounds. So it's like I said, without it being fresh in my mind, I don't know that I can say too much except, yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, so just to clarify on that, there's a dojo, and that also has a very traditional Oriental instrumentation there. It is a distinct track in Pokken for that dojo place, but just kind of wanted to point that out. So I don't know. It's more of sometimes I just bring up things here not because I have an answer for them, or even I expect Anne to have an answer, but because I want the listeners at home to think about them. I mean, it is called a feedback section for a reason, I suppose. And like I said, if you had any thoughts on any of the things we brought up there, you can give us a comment on one of these videos, drop us an email, pokepress@gmail.com, or use @pokepress on Twitter. All right, so we usually try to do these in North American release order. This is another time where we made a mistake, or I guess I made a mistake. We should have already done this one because it was released in North America in late 2015, which is before the Wii U version of Pokken came out. Oops. But we will be getting into it in our next session. Our next game that we'll be discussing is Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon. So this is the second 3DS Mystery Dungeon game. This one, I mean, it certainly tries to correct some things from the people didn't like about the Gates to Infinity. Namely, you can pick your own starter from a large list or do the quiz like usual. Gameplay-wise, I think it's kind of similar. It's got some new mechanics that we'll talk about, but as usual, it's got a nice slate of new music, and we should have the opposite problem. We shouldn't have any And if we have any problem with that, it's because there's too many good choices. But that'll be our next discussion. And did you get a chance to play this game when it came out? It was obviously a fairly late 3DS game.
Yeah, like most of the Mystery Dungeon series, like after the first one, I don't have a lot of familiarity with it. I'll have to go through it and see if any of it looks familiar to me. If I, played a friend's console or, played it at a tournament or something, or at a convention or something. But I am looking forward to getting to know this game if I haven't encountered it before.
Yeah, and I may have to do some digging as well. I gave it a quick test on my 3DS, and the game crashes on boot up on my new Nintendo 3DS XL, which is a bit of an issue. But yeah, this is I guess since the one on the Switch is a remake, this is the last truly original one, for now at least. But I think we're going to, as usual, have a ton of fun discussing the music of this one. Until then, Anne, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you.
This has been Stephen Reich. All right, folks, thanks. All right, folks, thanks. All right, so just a brief break here. We shouldn't need too much of one. And we'll do a game discussion. Kind of an interesting thing to discuss, and I think I did point out earlier, I think this is not a failure, but maybe not the success that they were kind of hoping for. I'm going to grab some water, and I'll be right back, and you can go ahead and do the same if you need to.
Okay. How's everyone doing in the chat? Is anyone in the chat? 3 of us watching. So, hello, everybody. I hope you're having a great Saturday, or if you're in a part of the world where it's already Sunday, I hope that's going good, too. I don't know what time zones we're all in. I don't know how time works. I've been working a lot and doing a farmer's market and trying to stay on top of all my online internet-y things, and it's a lot. The days are just a blur lately. But I'm trying to enjoy my summer nonetheless, so I'll have to think of something fun to do. I guess I'm not in school. I guess summer doesn't really matter. I can have summer whenever I want. I can have summer and winter if I so decide, right?
All right. Well, that's just a quick little break there. But thank you, everyone who comes into these. We always really appreciate that. I was actually, not completely. I'm never disappointed to talk about a Mystery Dungeon game like we will be doing probably sometime next month. But I had thought we're caught up, and our next game was going to be Pokemon Go, which I guess we'll get to in September or October. But
Pokemon Go will wait. Has waited a while.
It will be a very interesting discussion with the history of that game for sure. But in any case, let's do our game discussion of Pokken Tournament and its variations, I guess you could say there. So I'll leave a little bit of pause, and I'll do another introduction here. All right, well, I guess we can talk about Pokemon. Sorry. All right, well, let's talk about Pokken Tournament from a gameplay perspective, and we'll kind of be lumping all the different versions together, arcade, Wii U, Switch. There are differences a little bit with each of them, but they have a lot of the same content. First off, let's kind of talk about the character roster. Now, this is a Gen 6 game, at least primarily, although the Switch version would have obviously released after the release of Sun and Moon, but I don't think there are any Sun and Moon Pokemon in there. I'd have to double check between all the different things. But as far as the character roster, I mean, like I said, XY generation, so there does seem to be a heavy emphasis on Pokemon that can Mega Evolve. So there's a lot of that there. There's Scizor, there's Charizard, there's Gardevoir, there's at least 2, they don't have Swampert, but they do have Blaziken and Sceptile in there. and probably at least one or two others that can Mega Evolve. So that sort of serves as one of the base mechanics, is that burst mode or whatever it's called in there. What are your kind of thoughts on the character roster, Anne?
I mean, well, obviously with the mechanic of having their special attack, the burst attack thing, it would, yeah, I can see why they would focus on Pokemon that could Mega Evolve, because that just is a natural, special magical girl transformation situation. I mean, if this game had been more profitable and like more popular, like I would have liked to see them add a lot of different characters, because I enjoyed playing with the ones that were there, but I kind of just kept wondering, like, oh, it would be so neat to fight with this Pokemon or that Pokemon. So, I mean, obviously, there's like 700 Pokemon now. I don't know if they can handle doing all of them, but yeah, like, I loved what they had. I'm always here for more. I loved Chandelure. That one was my favorite.
Yeah, there are some definite interesting picks, like Chandelure, a Pokemon with no feet. You also have some quadruped Pokemon like Suicune. I do wonder if this game were still going, would they have given us Walking Wake DLC or whatever like that as another character variant, or if there was a second or third game in the series, to tie into that. So I'm sure they had some interesting discussions there about the various Pokemon they wanted to include with it. And then, even like the DX version even has some DLC you can purchase. I think it's Blastoise and, the sword wielding one. Let's see, Honedge, Doublade, and I cannot remember the fully evolved form. Darn it. They'll come to me later at some inappropriate, unimportant time, I'm sure. Aegislash, that's the one. So let me rephrase that. Yeah, there is even some DLC for it. You get Blastoise and Aegislash. So kind of makes sense. They do kind of use Sceptile as a bit of a sword fighter in there with like Leaf Blade and so on and so forth. I think one we definitely got to mention, though, let's see, we talked a little bit about Shadow Mewtwo, which is sort of obviously a Mewtwo variant. And then there's Pikachu Libre, which is sort of Pikachu as a luchador, which is pretty funny. It's also a female Pikachu. You can tell by the heart on its tail, which is
my girl. I love her.
It has a really great design and costume and stuff, and I kind of wish they had maybe done a little more of that. Although I think some people felt that Pikachu Libre sort of eliminated any possibility of Hawlucha being playable in this game. I think you can see it on a treadmill in the background of one of the areas in there, but I think folks were a little disappointed that Hawlucha didn't get to shine as a playable character in this game. If I remember correctly, about going back to Pikachu Libre, though, they announced that, I think, at Worlds sometime after the games themselves had been announced, and they had a thing for that. I don't know if it was 2015 in Boston, if like there was like going to be added to the arcade game there or something like that, or it was 2014, which would have been Washington, D.C. It was probably one of those two, and I cannot remember off the top of my head, unfortunately. But yeah, I think it's a fairly solid. Obviously, you would want more, but given how much they had to do with all of this, I think they made some fairly decent choices.
Yeah, they're very fun, and they're all different, and they animate them so differently. Like, they each got their own little personality, and the special attacks are, like, fun to discover. Yeah, like, I think they did a really great job.
Yeah, so talking about some of the game mechanics, you mentioned the burst mode, but sort of I'll admit, neither I and I don't believe Anne either are experts in the Tekken series, which this borrows a lot of ideas from, somewhat unsurprisingly. But, the mechanics, there's sort of your regular attacks, there's your jumping move that you have. There's a triangle of sorts. I think confused Anne during our live stream. There's sort of regular attacks. There's sort of a, counter attack. There's also I don't know. It's basically a throw move that you can do on a blocking opponent, or if they're not, whatever there. And that's called a little triangle because they have sort of a rock paper scissors relationship, which is kind of interesting because Pokemon is obviously based on the rock paper scissors mechanics, but there's no type weakness or super effective in this game. But yeah, and on top of those base mechanics, there's things like the burst mode, and then and there's also support Pokemon and stuff like that. So there's a fair bit of variety. And if you actually look through like the move list, most of that stuff is based on moves from the main series video games. How'd you kind of feel about this game in terms of those mechanics, Anne?
I liked it a lot. Obviously, like, I'm not a really great gamer, for starters. And then when it comes to games where I fight, blocking is for losers. That block could be 5 more attacks. So obviously, I don't think that I truly was able to explore all the nuances of strategy in this fighting game. But I really enjoyed seeing what all the Pokemon's attacks were, and like trying to do combos and trying to be like, okay, if I do this button, oh, that's what their distance attack looks like. That's cool. And this is what their attack looks like where the screen shift mode and things like that. So I had a good time with it and exploring it, but I would not say that I mined every detail that there is to be found just because of how
No, there's some deep stuff. I did get a chance while this had competitive play to talk to some of the folks who played it, and as I expected, they knew a lot of the intricacies and stuff like that. So can go pretty deep here. One mechanic we should definitely mention, though, is that this game can shift from sort of a free roaming perspective to a dual mode. So it goes from kind of like the open area, and that's triggered by certain moves that you use and certain hits that you score on your opponent's Pokemon will shift to and from that, which I think gives it a little more interest in there. It does tend to shift fairly frequently in there. So that I found was a nice little wrinkle in there. As far as the character designs, we talked a little bit about that with the character roster. I mean, as far as the Pokemon go, I do wonder if some of this, like, it's not going for like the full level of quote unquote realism that like the Detective Pikachu movie went with, but you can see it heading a little bit in that direction sometimes. Like, it's definitely distinct. Like, you can say inspiration from stuff like particularly the Stadium games. Interesting. I remember the last one of those we got was Battle Revolution on the Wii, and there's definitely some influence in terms of the locations and settings and arenas and stuff like that. But the character models are definitely, they're a notch above what you will see in most of the Pokemon games in terms of detail and stuff. I don't know. I kind of have a loose smattering of thoughts on some of the character designs. Anne, what did you want to put in there?
I liked all of them. They were fun. They looked like the Pokemon. I really loved like just the little animations. Like my Chandelure was so sassy, and and it was fun watching. Like, I think it was Machoke that got super dramatic when it lost and like just started crying, but when it won, like it did jumping jacks and push-ups to celebrate. So I thought there was a lot of character in these.
Yeah. Some of them may have come across as a little weird, like the Gardevoir thing. Like when I did one of the daily challenges, I had to use Gardevoir for that, and then after I finished, I was sort of reading some text or whatever on the screen. It was sort of looking at me and would just say it's whatever I think its Japanese name is periodically. So it was kind of a little weird there. But I think, yeah, I mean, obviously it looks different than anything before or since in terms of graphic design in the franchise. That doesn't make it automatically right or wrong. It's hard to say if it's had an influence on some of the later games, since this was released obviously before Sword and Shield, Scarlet and Violet, Legends Arceus, all of which go in a little bit different direction each. Nothing quite like this one. All right, well, I think the other thing we got to talk about here, this game, like, it was not a failure. Like, the Wii U version outsold Street Fighter V, which was a PS4 and PC game, which I think, well, to be honest, is more of an indictment on Street Fighter V, if you're being honest there. And how that game did not get a good reception, particularly on launch. But all the same, I mean, it seems like there's all like any Pokemon side game will pretty much sell well at least once. It seems like, and that's not supposed to be a knock on some of the ones that's gotten sequels that have underperformed and stuff like that. It's not supposed to be like that. But it does seem like this game didn't have too long of a legs. Like they did promote it. Like I remember after the Switch version came out in 2017 at European Internationals, they brought some folks out to talk about the Switch version and sort of demo it for a little bit in the middle of the tournament there, I guess in between rounds or something, to sort of give it a little more publicity to make sure people knew it was out there. I think perhaps the Switch version just had so much competition because the Switch was so hot out of the gate in that first year. I mean, it's still going strong now, but you take a look at all the stuff they put out. Yeah, I'm not sure if maybe this wasn't a remake, unlike, say, Mario Kart 8, they really decided they needed. I don't know, but it's kind of hard to unpack. Like, yeah, obviously, there's not a lot of stuff to do here besides battling, which I think is one reason it's not as, maybe it doesn't have as much longevity as something like most of the other side games, or certainly the main series games where there's like multiple different ways to play it. This one has different modes, but kind of a jumble there, Anne. Sorry about that. But what kind of thoughts do you have on this part?
Yeah, as you say, it's kind of a lot of questions that all might have factored in, because it does seem like it was very well received. Like all the ratings are good. It sold a lot of copies. Like even the Switch version sold 1 million copies in like a year. But like there's a lot of little things. Like for example, the arcade game, one game credit can last a player 45 minutes. So like in the world of arcade games, like you want the turnover to be a little faster than that, so you make a profit. So for that reason, like a video arcade in Japan was removing the Pokken Tournament machines because like they're just not making their money back if people are hogging the machine for 45 minutes. So like that's something to consider. As you say, like there not being as much to do as a main series game. It contributes to like how long people are still playing and still talking and keeping the game popular and alive. Like that's something to consider. There's a lot of little things that may have all come together or to make this not be something that we talk about as much today. But at the same time, it's still surprising to me because I remember how many years, a full decade, where we as Pokemon fans were like, I wish there was a Pokemon game where we could it was basically just a fighting game with Pokemon, where we could control the Pokemon and not yet have it be turn-based, have it be real-time. And that's what this is. So yeah, like again, I can see a lot of little things that like might have turned people off. The thing that strikes me is because it is so based off of the Tekken franchise and like a sort of Street Fighter like game, I sometimes wonder if the people who would be good and succeed and find those games really fun and want to play competitively, if they would not maybe just play the Tekken series and not be as interested in Pokken, whereas the people who'd be here for the Pokemon are often quite younger and may prefer the Pokemon main series as it is, the turn-based style. So I don't know. I really don't.
And by the way, for the folks, I'm sorry to correct you on stream, man. It is pronounced Pokken with a long O sound.
That's okay. I will say it however my brain decides to say it in the moment.
That's okay. I'm not gonna, burn down your house or anything like that over it.
Good to know.
But I figured I should point that out just so folks know.
I know somebody might want to know that. Yeah.
But if you're comparing it to some of the, obviously the gold standard, other than like Go for spin-off series, is the Mystery Dungeon one, which, like we said, hasn't had an entry for a while, but all the same, But, like if there are any lessons to be learned here, like they didn't lose their shirts off of this game. That's certainly for sure. And going back to the arcade thing for the 45 minutes, I'm not sure, I don't know if they adjusted the difficulty as sometimes when they bring a home console release versus the arcade release. They sometimes rework something since they're not trying to get nowadays it's your 100 yen coins in Japan. Here, I think everything's done with like RFID these days. Maybe they still take quarters in some of them, but you get the idea. Yeah, it's hard to exactly say. I think Smash Brothers is also kind of the elephant in the room we got to talk about. That I think has more appeal to a more casual fighting game audience and more party play like that than this does, especially since that can go up to like 8 players, and this is maximum of 2. So some obvious limitations there. Yeah, I think it's kind of a question mark. It's something we might just have to ponder, and that's also something you can give us some feedback on. So, yeah, it's really not a bad game, and like I said, I think gameplay-wise, you also enjoyed it more than I did, but yeah, it's kind of hard to say.
At how much I did enjoy it. Like, I've never like streamed myself playing games. If I did, I think this would be the one I did, just because it's fun to play, but also like I enjoy getting into it and getting competitive and talking to the screen. I was surprised at how interactive I got with it, so I had a good time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't doubt. As someone who goes, I don't compete in it, but I go to pretty much every week a Super Smash Brothers Ultimate thing that's run at the same store that runs our Pokemon League, just to sort of hang out with folks and sometimes get some extra podcast work done. And I absolutely respect the skills of people who play these games at a high level. It is not easy to do that. But I think for me, I like this, but maybe it just didn't give I don't know, it's not bad. It's just wasn't for me, I guess, as much. I enjoyed playing it for a little bit, and that was most of it. I don't know.
You won't lose sleep when you return it to the library?
Probably not. All right, I think that covers that. So I've got that done. I guess the one thing gameplay-wise, I didn't want to keep going on and on, so I kind of brought it back there. The single-player mode is, like, I assume in the arcade you just played through all the rival fighters, and that was your story mode there. In at least the Switch port, there's a bunch of ranks you have to go through. And like the first one of that was really kind of boring and easy. It wasn't until that second set there that I really got some actual challenge there where I would actually sometimes lose a round. And it wasn't until near the end of that where I felt I was getting to parity there. So, yeah, kind of strange. But not a bad game in any way, shape, or form. You can tell a lot of effort went into it. But yeah, so like I said, Anne, anything else you want to leave off on before I end the stream?
No, I'm good for now. Hopefully, I'll have a opportunity to play with the listeners someday. Maybe I will. This will be my breaking out into streaming games or something.
Yeah, I'm trying to think the next opportunity we'll have for a player versus player side game, and I'm not sure there really is one going forward. And that's one of the other unique things about this,
Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of unfortunately, we did the Pokemon Puzzle League before it came to Nintendo Switch Online on the N64, so we couldn't really play against people that way either. So, not sure we're going to have another chance. But one thing we do plan on doing, and I want to tease here, at some point, maybe later this year, depending on how our schedule works out, I want to do an episode on music from other Game Freak games. And one of those is going to be... and so we'll get another chance to live stream some stuff here. We've been hitting a lot of 3DS games, which I have no viable way to live stream. I don't have any of that hardware type stuff. But yeah, so thank you everyone who came into there, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.